Today we're diving into a 200-year-old battle that could have easily been lost to time if it wasn't for a single, solitary monument. This is the story of Bhima Koregaon, a really bloody conflict from 1818 that has become this powerful and pretty controversial symbol of pride in modern India. And that brings us to a really puzzling question. Why would thousands of people gather every single January 1st to celebrate at a victory pillar that was built by their former colonial rulers, the British East India Company? It just feels like a huge contradiction. To figure this one out, we've got to go back in time. So, we're heading back to the early 19th century, right to the last days of the Peshwa Empire in Western India. You see, to really get what this battle was all about, you first have to understand the world it was fought in, and that world was defined by a brutally rigid social hierarchy. Back then, society was governed by the laws of the Manu Smriti. Now, this was an ancient text, but the Peshwa rulers enforced its rules with just punishing severity. And this created this incredibly harsh caste system where communities that were labeled untouchable faced extreme daily oppression. The way this system was designed to dehumanize people was just chillingly specific. Dalits, especially from the Mahar community, were forced to tie actual pots around their necks to catch their own spit so it wouldn't pollute the ground. They had to tie a broom to their waist to sweep away their own footprints. And often, they could only walk around at high noon, so their short shadows couldn't fall on and defile someone from a higher caste. This was so much more than just discrimination. It was like a form of psychological warfare, a daily nightmare designed to absolutely crush the human spirit. This quote here from a young Dalit girl named Mukta Salve writing in 1855, it just captures the raw brutality of that time. She was one of the very first students of the social reformers Jyotiba and Savitribai Phule, and she gave a voice to the horrors her people were living through. This is a first-hand account of a system that wasn't just about separating people, but about completely erasing them. So it's out of this incredibly oppressive world that our story of the battle really emerges. You have to understand, for the soldiers involved, this was so much more than just another military fight. It was a desperate stand for dignity and self-respect against a system that basically denied they were even human. So the date is January 1st, 1818. In this little village called Koregaon, on the banks of the Bhima River, a small British-led force is marching to go reinforce the city of Pune. They have no idea they're about to run into the entire Peshwa army. Okay, just look at this slide for a second. It lays out the absolutely incredible odds. You've got Captain Staunton commanding about 834 soldiers, and a huge chunk of them were Mahars from the Bombay Native Infantry. And on the other side, the Peshwa, with an army of almost 28,000. The mismatch is just staggering. So after this grueling 22-mile march overnight, Staunton's troops are completely exhausted. They manage to fortify themselves in the village of Koregaon, and for the next 12 hours, they just fight with this ferocious courage. They're outnumbered more than 30 to 1. They have no food, no water, but they hold their ground against wave after wave of attacks from the massive Peshwa force. By nightfall, the battle is basically a stalemate. Then, the Peshwa army, probably worried that a bigger British force was on its way, just withdraws. They retreat under the cover of darkness. So while it wasn't a clear military win for anybody, just think about it. The sight of a 28,000-strong army retreating from just 800 soldiers? Well, that was a huge moral victory for the company troops. So the fighting was over, but its story? Oh, that was just getting started. Preserved in stone, the memory of that day was about to be completely transformed over the next 100 years. The British knew how bravely their soldiers had fought, so they built this 60-foot victory pillar, a Vijay Stump, right at the site. They carved the names of the fallen soldiers into it, many of them Mahars. And the British themselves called it one of the proudest triumphs of the British Army in the East. Now, have a look at this timeline, because this is where everything really clicks into place. For decades, the pillar's story just kind of faded from mainstream history. But then, everything changed on January 1st, 1927. That's the day the great social reformer and Dalit leader, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, visited the site. He completely reframed the battle, not as a colonial victory, but as a historic moment of Dalit assertion against their oppressors. And that single act revived the pillar's meaning, transforming it into the sacred symbol that it is today. Dr. Ambedkar's perspective here is absolutely crucial. He argued that the Mahar soldiers weren't fighting because they were loyal to the British. No, they fought because the army offered them a way to make a living, and more importantly, it gave them a chance to fight back against a social system that treated them worse than dogs and cats. For them, the real enemy wasn't some foreign power. It was the tyranny they faced at home from the Peshwas.
But like any powerful symbol, the story of Bhima Koregaon isn't that simple. Its legacy is complex, it's layered, and it is still fiercely debated today.
So today, there are two main ways people see this battle. On one hand, for many in the Dalit community, it's a foundational moment in their history, a glorious stand against centuries of oppression. On the other hand, some see it as just one battle among many in the larger Third Anglo-Maratha War, a conflict where Indian soldiers from all different castes fought on both sides, which kind of complicates any simple story of liberation. And this is a really important point. The British were not some kind of social reformers here. In fact, if you look at the source documents, other British-led military units at the time, like the Pune Auxiliary Horse, had rules that explicitly barred men of low caste. So that kind of suggests their motives were probably more about strategy than they were about social justice. So, after all that, why does a 200-year-old battle still resonate so strongly today? Well, because it's a living symbol of the struggle against injustice. It's also a perfect example of how community can take back a historical event and give it a powerful new meaning. And maybe most importantly, it directly connects a brutal past to the urgent, ongoing conversations we have about caste, identity, and power in India today. When you really think about it, the pillar at Bhima Koregaon is a total paradox. It's a monument built by one empire to celebrate a victory over another, but now it's revered as a sacred symbol by a community fighting for its own dignity. It just goes to show you that history isn't just about what happened, it's about the story we choose to tell about it. And that kind of leaves us with one last thought. How did the stories we tell about our past define who we are today? Thanks for joining me.